Hello geometry students, welcome back. This is Mr. Martin. We are continuing with section 1.2. We're talking about angles. So in this video we want to start talking about the measure of an angle. So the measure of an angle is the smallest, this is important, smallest amount of rotation about the vertex from one ray of the angle to the other ray. All right, so for example, if I have an angle that's 30 degrees, we would say that the measure of angle A equals 30 degrees. Okay, notice the little m there to show that we're talking about the measure of the angle. All right, and then I'm sure you've all seen a protractor. So used to measure angles in degrees. So there are actually other ways to measure angles besides degrees that we won't really talk about in this class, just something for you to know. And you want to make sure that you have a protractor with you every day in class. So if you haven't picked one of those up, you could probably get one at the bookstore or at Walgreens. But just make sure that you have that. It's required material for the class. All right, and we've talked a little bit about congruent figures. So when we have congruent angles, two angles are congruent if and only if they have the same measure. So a couple different notations for congruent angles. I could say that the angles are congruent, so I could say angle A is congruent to angle B. So if I took one angle and placed it exactly on top of the other, they would match up perfectly. Sometimes we'll talk about the measures of the angles. In that case, we would say the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle B. So in this case, we're talking about the number associated with that measurement of the angle. So if both angles were, say, 45 degrees, we would say the measure of angle A is congruent to the measure of angle B. Notice we have an equal sign here because we're actually comparing numbers. And over here we have a congruent sign because we're actually comparing the shapes, the actual angles themselves. All right, so if we wanted some congruent angles here, do a couple different examples. Here's angle DOG, and then we'll draw another angle over here, angle CAT. And if I want to show that they're congruent, we can use tick marks. So this is how we use tick marks. We'll put a little arc in there, and then you can use whatever lines you want. I just put two little tick marks there. And in this case, we could say that angle DOG is congruent to angle CAT. And I know that based on the tick marks that we put in there. Or sometimes you'll have the actual measures of the angles. So let's say they both said 40 degrees. You would know they're congruent. So one possible example for a pair of congruent angles. Now, another way that we can create congruent angles is with an angle bisector. So an angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle into two congruent angles. You notice I like to use symbols as much as possible because it shortens things a little bit. So let's take a look at a picture here. I have a large angle here. Let's call it angle AXY. Now, if I want to bisect it, I have to use another ray that starts at X, and it's going to come out here somewhere. So I'm going to draw in a ray. We'll put another letter there. We'll call it P. So now, if I intend this to bisect the large angle, angle AXY, I would just show that with tick marks. So again, you can use whatever little symbols you want in there on your arcs to show that they're congruent. So now I would say that ray XP, notice the symbol, you have to put the symbol above there to indicate it's a ray. Ray XP bisects angle AXY. Okay? The ray divides the angle into angle AXP and angle PXY. So these are the two angles that are going to be congruent. All right, so we could also say angle AXP is congruent to angle PXY. All right, so angle bisector, again, a little bit more vocabulary for you, another important concept. If you have any questions, again, make sure that you ask me or ask your teacher or go to the point and get some help, whatever you need to do to make sure you have help. All right, so let's move on to the examples here. We'll go through a couple of these and then I want you to do some on your own. So for example 1, we want to name the angle in 3 ways. So the first one, we have this angle with its vertex at A. So since there's only one angle in this picture, I could call it angle A. Now, if I wanted to make sure it was perfectly clear, maybe there were some other angles in the picture, then I would have to use 3 letters. So I could call it angle FAT. I could also flip that around if I wanted to. So we're actually going to name it in 4 different ways. So we could call it angle TAF. Again, the important thing I want you to notice is that A, the vertex is right in the middle, and then F and T are points on each of the rays. And then the third way, we could put a number inside here. I'm just going to put number 1, and then we could call it angle 1. So there's 3 different ways. All right, so in part B, we actually have a bunch of different angles here. We've got 3 different angles. I have this angle up here. I have this angle down here, and then I have the whole big angle, which is put together, which is made up of 1 and 2 together. So I have 3 different angles here. So let's go ahead and let's name angle 1 in 3 different ways. So I could call it angle 1, or I could call it angle CAT, or I could call it angle TAC. All right, so why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if you can name the other 2 angles in a couple of ways. And when you restart the video, I'll have some answers up there, and you can compare yours to mine. So pause the video now and see if you can find some additional names for the other 2 angles. All right, so for angle 2, we could call it angle 2, because that number is inside the angle there, or we could call it angle TAE, or we could flip that around. We could reverse it and call it angle EAT. So 3 different names for that angle there. And then for the big angle that I highlighted in yellow, we really only have 2 ways to name that one. We could call it angle CAE, or we could call it angle EAC. All right, go ahead and pause the video one more time and see what you can do for the 3 different angles in part C, And when you restart the video, we can compare our answers. So pause the video now and give that a go. All right, so I placed some numbers inside of these smaller angles here that make up the big angle. So I've got angle 1 here and angle 2 over there. So starting with angle 1, I could call it angle 1. And then using 3 letters, I could call it TNA, or I could reverse that and call it ANT. Then moving on to angle 2, I could simply call it angle 2. Or using 3 letters again, I could call it angle RNA. N is in the middle, that's my vertex. Or switch that around and call it ANR. And then for the large angle, I can call it angle RNT, or flip that around and call it angle TNR. Now, one thing I want to caution you about, we can't use a single capital letter to name any angle in this picture, or actually in part B, because just saying angle N would be confusing. We wouldn't know if we're talking about the angle in the angle 1 or angle 2 or the whole big angle. So let's write a little note here. We can not use angle N for any of the angles. All right, it would be confusing to use angle N since there's more than one angle at this vertex. So we're either going to have to put a number inside the vertex or inside the angle for the smaller angles, or for the larger angle, the biggest angle, use 3 letters. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this video. And again, if you had any questions, make sure that you ask, and we will see you in the next one.